Hello again, 3 times today, people from the great southern land and all around the world. I'll wait for a couple of people to jump online. We're just going to be talking about fun with words and the little riddle. Well, it wasn't really a riddle, but the question that was posed on my page last night. It got a lot of comments, and I just want to talk a little bit about it. Because it's quite interesting, and there's some really good answers there, and obviously some people got offended. I don't know how, but anyway. But yeah, some really intelligent answers and some really interesting answers, and it really brought to light some concepts about our perception of how we read things and how we see things, and how some people try to change. They try to change the words of the question to fit with their conception, as opposed to realigning their comprehension of the question and slowing down and trying to comprehend it. They try to change it, and I think that's really interesting as well, and we've all done that. Hey Toby, and Toby's from Bristol, and so the question was this: Mr. Smith had 4 daughters. Each daughter had 4 brothers. How many kids does Mr. Smith have? Now, when I read this question on someone else's post, my brain automatically went to numbers and calculating numbers, and just like majority of other people have done, we automatically, we sort of skip over, we speed read, or we tend to speed read things. So being cautious, I sort of read through some other answers, and I was seeing the no, and I'm like, okay, well, there's obviously something in this question. So I slowed down the way I read it, and it read, Mr. Smith had 4 daughters. Each daughter had 4 brothers. How many kids does Mr. Smith have? So when we look at the word had, and we go to the Oxford Concise Dictionary, we look at the word had, and it's past and past part of have. So it's past tense, and the word have, how many kids does Mr. Smith have? Have is present tense. So there's 2 tenses in that question. So the question is not incorrect. The question is structurally correct. But the way people are perceiving it, it may not make sense to them. So they sort of try and change the question, and whatever else. But it's really attention to detail in the words. Now, I didn't pay much attention at school, so I'm brushing up on my English and my grammar and all that stuff as we speak. And, I'm sure, I can't remember when we learned this in school because I didn't pay so much attention, but I'm sure it was like one of the basic things that we would have learned, whatever it was, whatever grade it was, grade 5, 6, whenever we started learning English, I can't remember. But past tense and present tense would have been some of the fundamental basics we would have learned at school. Well, you'd hope so anyway. I do sort of remember learning a bit about that. So back then, being children and not being filled with preconceived ideas and conspiracies and thoughts and whatever, we would have looked at that and said, all right, well, we would have seen it for what it is, because we would have been in the childlike mind. We would have read it slowly, would have gone, he had this, he had that, and now how many does he have now? So we would have gone, well, that's past tense, and this is present tense. So past tense means he had it, and he no longer has it, right? And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's quite, it's freezing, is it? It's quite important for us to learn and understand and really read through things, because the words of, let's say, acts, statutes, law, whatever, it comes down to the letter of the law. It comes down to the grammar. It comes down to the punctuation. It comes down to the type of text it is. All these things are important, you know. So a lot of people were saying, you know, we can assume it's this, or we're assuming it's that. Well, instead of assuming, because that's how the statutory system works. It works on presumptions and assumptions, right? And that's basically how people are enslaved. Yeah. So instead of assuming this and assuming that it means that, like when we look at other words, we assume that they mean this and we assume they mean that, when in law or the King's language, it may be completely the opposite to what we assume, right? So, yeah, it really is quite interesting. We had some pretty awesome comments. Jeffrey said about the kids being baby goats. Well, I put the definition of kids up there, and it does have children and that, so that was kind of, you know, not the right answer. He did say none, because kids have baby goats, and the answer is none. There's a few others. Someone commented, I think it was Andrew, commented Mr. Smith is a dead entity, so he can't have any children, because Mr. Smith is a corporate fiction. Yeah, it's a piece of paper. Unless Mr. Smith claims to be Mr. Smith, then who's going to argue with him and say he's not? You know? So, really interesting the way it's perceived, you know, and the way we look at things, and we sort of don't pay attention to the words we're reading, or we think we're paying attention to them, but we're kind of missing the fundamentals, you know what I mean? And that's how we get ourselves in situations that we don't want to be in when it comes to contracts and things like that. So, yeah, and it was also really interesting to see that there are some people on there would rather argue, you know, that the question's wrong and that this is wrong and whatever else, as opposed to investigating and having a look, well, what does had mean? Yeah. Oh, well, that makes sense now. The question makes sense. Yeah, past tense, and present tense, two different things. So it really is, and the sort of more I thought about it, it really was like a child sort of grade question. But as we grow up, and myself included, as we grow up, we sort of try and look for the meanings behind things and whatever. Instead of investigating it, we can come up with things and we can just run with that. And if it doesn't align with what we think it is, then we'll just fob it off as being wrong. You know, so it's a real eye-opener, and for me, it seems like a real good opportunity for people to look into that and say, oh yeah, well, okay, well now it makes sense. Maybe I can look into things further, you know, because just because it doesn't make sense to somebody at the time doesn't make it incorrect. Just because they're perceiving it differently to what it is doesn't make it incorrect. It just means that their perception of it is different from what it actually is. And we see that a lot in today's day and age. Perception of what things are compared to what they actually are. You know, we tend to get wound up in words and texts and you know, other people's opinions in this day and age, as opposed to going straight to the root source and looking at that and investigating it ourselves. We just tend to accept what other people, because it aligns with what we think or what we want. And it might mean we don't have to do any more research. We might not have to pick up that dictionary and look up what had means, or look up what every word in that sentence means until we understand it. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's really interesting. Lisa Rogerson says, this is so interesting. Google the same question. So yeah, the answer is 0. The answer is 0 because Mr. Smith had 4 daughters. That is past tense. He had 4 daughters. Each daughter had 4 brothers. They don't have 4 brothers anymore. He doesn't have 4 daughters anymore. So how many kids does Mr. Smith have? Well, he has 0 because it's past tense. Yeah? So the spells cast by the spelling and the words is what it really comes down to, and this is what I've kind of been talking about for the last couple of years and trying to introduce and bring into people's attention, because it is the spelling that is kept on the record. It is the words and the definitions of the words. So if we're talking in a lawful sense, it is the words written on the paper. It's not what we perceive them to be. Yeah, because our perception differs from the judge's perception. And the judge's perception differs from the prosecutor's perception. And the prosecutor's perception differs from the people who wrote the act in Parliament. Yeah? So perception versus what it actually means, 2 completely separate kettles of fish. And when we just assume that things mean something, and if they don't align with what we think they are, then they're wrong, then we can get ourselves into, or if it's with contracts per se or law, then we can get ourselves into situations we don't want to be in, right? Unknowingly, because we're assuming that that word means something that it doesn't mean. Now, for example, right, if I go to if I look at the Acts Interpretation Act, right, and the Acts Interpretation Act 1901, that's an act. It's the application of the act applies to all acts, including this act, and this act must bind the crown, right? So this act binds the crown, and when you look at this, it refers to persons, and what are persons? Now, most people will just assume that a person is them, and that's all a person is. There's one definition for a person, and that definition is, some people might think it's me, you know. Personally, I don't think that, but it depends on the context. It depends on the words surrounding it. It depends on what context it's being used. So if we look at it in a lawful sort of sense, references to persons. In any act, expressions used to denote persons generally include a body politic or corporate, as well as an individual. So, okay, well, a body politic or corporate, right? That's a corporation, yeah? That's a person by definition. But also in that definition, you'll see there's brackets, right? There's brackets and there's quotation marks. And some people will read whatever's in those brackets and assume that they're part of the sentence. Whereas the brackets themselves, according to the Styles Manual, means that the sentence itself exists with or without the brackets. So whatever's enclosed in the brackets is not necessary for that sentence to be complete, right? So the full sentence reads, in any act, expressions used to denote persons, generally such as person, party, someone, anyone, no one, another, and whoever, include a body politic or corporate, as well as an individual. Now, an individual at law can also be a body corporate, yeah, or it can be a natural person, right? And include, when we think of include, we think it's, you know, it could be any of those things as well as this. Well, that's one definition of include. Another definition of include means it encloses, right? It excludes everything else. The inclusion of a body politic or corporate, as well as an individual, excludes all other definitions, right? And when we go into such as person, party, someone, anyone, and they're all in italics, sorry, not italics, in quotation marks. Well, quotation marks also has its own meaning. You know, they're either direct speech or, let me have a look here, direct speech or a technical term. Now, direct speech is defined as a language of a nation, group, region, or an utterance. Yeah? A language of a nation, which is an organisation, corporation, right? Or a group or a region. It also is a technical term. It could be, when you have something in quotation marks, it could also be a technical term. And a technical term is defined as something relating to a particular subject or craft requiring special knowledge to be understood. Yeah, and in legal terms, technical is also belonging or particular to an art or profession, right? Technical terms are frequently called in the books words of art. Yeah. So these words of art, well, they have their own meaning. Yeah. They belong to some other organisation, not English, right? If they're in quotation marks. And if they're in brackets, well, they're not even part of the sentence. So it's really, you know, what that's basically saying, the Acts Interpretation Act, which binds all other acts and the Crown, and what that's saying is that reference to a person in all other acts, unless it's shown otherwise, basically refers to a corporation. And that might not make sense to a lot of people. But when you realise that your person, your birth certificate, is your corporation, yeah, that is your contract, corporation, it starts to make sense, right? So it's really interesting. And a person, you know, a person has a name. What is a name? A name is a designation. A designation is a, what have we got here? A name is the designation of an individual person or of a firm or corporation. And a designate is to indicate or set apart from its natural person, to indicate or set apart for a purpose or duty, with, to, or for, as to designate an officer for a command. Yeah? So what it's saying is your name, yeah, that one in all capital letters, that language that's not English, that name is your corporation, yeah? And when you're agreeing to be that name, you're bound by those corporate rules, right? And this is how the whole, it's not even a deception. I shouldn't say it's deception, because it's just what it is. It's written how it is, and it is what it is. And because we don't understand it, well, we sort of tend to attack it and say it's a deception and a fraud. Well, in legally speaking, I mean, it's not. Yeah, because it's a completely different language. Now, if we don't understand that these all capital letter words are a different language, if we don't comprehend that, then that's our fault. It's no one else's fault. You know, I mean, we run into issues when we bring that up in the courts, and of course they don't want to talk about that, because that sort of dismantles the system, in so far as they can't enforce that on people because it's being brought up. But I mean, even when you bring it up in courts, maybe the magistrates don't know what you're talking about. I mean, the police maybe don't know what you're talking about. Sometimes they do. But the fraud that we get, well, it's not a fraud, the system that we're caught up in is because of our perception of the writing or the marks on the pieces of paper that we're We think we are reading and we think we are comprehending fully, but we're not at all, you know? So I really enjoy fun with words because, you know, it's the key to understanding our situation that we're in now and understanding the difference between having rights and not having rights, you know? So yeah, basically we go back to the Acts Interpretation Act, which talks about persons, which binds the Crown and all other acts, and it refers to persons as being corporations. Now the reason why, and it says it clearly, the reason why that is, and for those acts to actually be valid, they have to be referring to corporations, unless they're talking about de jure criminal acts where you've hurt somebody, right? Then that applies to everybody. And then the word person, being used in proper English, can also refer to a human being, right? Because if a human being hurts another human being, then you've got a crime. Yeah, but where there's no injury, right? So you look at the Road Safety Act or any of these other acts, right? Statutory acts that are private acts, they don't have royal assent and whatever. When you look at those acts and they refer to persons, they're talking about corporations, because if they weren't talking about corporations, they would be invalid, because they don't have the right to infringe on a human being's rights. Yeah, they're not allowed to do that. That's unlawful, right? But when they refer to persons as corporations, and people accept that and say, "Oh yeah, that's me. That's my name. That's yep. I understand that. I agree to that." Well, then you're giving your power. You're agreeing to the contract they're offering you, because it's all contract. Yeah. Those acts couldn't exist if they were referring to human beings, because that would put human beings in a state of slavery, right? That would mean they're subject to a master without a contract, and that would be slavery by definition. Yeah. But because it's all done through contract, through the birth certificate, through licenses and whatever, through those contracts, well, it's just contract law, you know? So that's really the spelling. And one other thing, like your birth certificate, right? If you look up the definition of birth and certificate in the all capital letters, not in the lowercase, because you've got to look at the document and look at the words as they are on the document. Yeah, that's why you need the Black's Law Dictionary, because that is the all capital language, yeah, which is presented on the birth certificate, right? And if you look at what a date is, right? A date, right? It could be the written instrument of the time, day, month, and year when it was made. Yep, we get that. Also, the word is derived from the Latin word datum, meaning given. Date of birth. So your birth is you coming. Birth is defined as being born or coming into a separate existence. Your separate existence is coming from your human body, yeah, to the contract. That is a separate existence. Your human body, and you're giving your body to that contract, right? So the date, the word derived from Latin word datum, meaning given, and is defined as the time given or specified, delivered or recorded. The primary signification of date is not time in the abstract, nor time taken absolutely, but time given or specified. Time in some way ascertained and fixed, right? What is given? Given or give is to transfer ownership or possession without compensation. So when you fill out the date of birth, right, the date being the time given, and you're giving, you're transferring ownership or possession without compensation to bestow upon another gratuitously or without consideration, to transfer or yield to or bestow upon another, one of the operative words in deeds of conveyance of real property, importing a common law, a warranty or covenant for quiet enjoyment during lifetime of the grantor, right? So the date of birth, the date that you came into a separate existence, right? The date that you came into contractual being by the birth certificate, yeah, by those definitions of birth and certificate, you came into a separate being the human being in the contract, yeah, and then you gave that away when you filled out the date of birth, because date is also defined as giving, yeah, and giving is a transfer of ownership, right? This is what it is, you know, because you've got to look at those words, and there's no point getting that birth certificate and looking at the Oxford Dictionary or an English dictionary. You need to have the dictionary, which is in all capital letters, because that's what it's written as. And that in itself is a separate language from English, yeah, according to the Styles Manual, 11.147 and other chapters. So this is the not hidden, it's not deception, it just is what it is. And because we don't understand or we don't comprehend the words that we're reading or the language that we're reading, we just assume it to be something that it's not really, just like the question we had on Facebook. You know, we just assume that, or we speed read it and we do this because we've got other things to do, right? We just speed read and we put an answer because, you know, we've got to get on TV and we've got to watch this and we've got to watch that. We've got other things to do, right? We're all busy, yeah? So we miss the finer details. And because we miss the finer details, we trap ourselves into contracts, which we then feel to be slavery. And we're like, why have I got no human rights? Why does this not apply to me? Why does that not apply to me? What's going on? Because, well, you know, you never made the contract for your birth certificate, so that really shouldn't exist. It doesn't exist, you know. But then when we go on and we perform under that contract, meaning we accept things under that contract, then we're performing under that contract, right? So then we become bound by it. So it kind of is a lawful contract, yeah, because we're taking from it, we're receiving, we're performing, so we have a duty to it, you know. So it's really, really interesting, and it goes on and on and on and on and on, you know, and it's really, really interesting to look into. But you need, when you want to understand those documents in all capital, you need one of these, right? You need one of these because this is the book that has the all capital words. And the all capital word is a different language. Doesn't matter what people say or what they think or what they believe, just like the question we had on Facebook. It's irrelevant. It is what it is. Yeah. And on the record, especially when it comes to law and courts, on the record, it is what it is. Whether we know it or not, or understand it or not. That's just what it is. You know? So it's yeah, really fascinating. And that's kind of where we're at. That's why we are in the situation we're in. And majority of people, you know, the ones enforcing it and the ones under it and everything like that, you know, majority don't know because they speed read it and they assume that they understand what it means, but they don't. Which means that they're putting themselves in a position, not only the people who are signing the contracts, but also the ones who are enforcing it, are putting themselves in a position because they're only answerable to the law, yeah, and they must uphold it, which means they must understand it. And if they don't, right, and they get caught out on it, then they're putting themselves in a position where, well, you know, they could get in trouble if the individual or person or human that they're, you enforcing their will upon is not in that standing, right? Just say that they've handed their birth certificate back and they've stepped out of that contract, and then they get attacked by someone who thinks they have the right to do that. Well, then the attacker, unbeknownst to him, because he just doesn't know, is now in the wrong. And when he gets pulled up on it and put in front of a court of law, well, he's got to answer to the law, not anyone else. Doesn't have to answer to anyone else, So it behooves everybody, every single human being, to understand and comprehend the languages that are being used and the words, and to really put a little bit of time and effort into knowing these things. Now, this book, you can order it online. I think it was about $100 or $80, or 160, or you can download it for free. Black's Law Dictionary 4th edition, free PDF download. You just download it for free on the internet and you've got it on your computer. And it is a fun, really, really fun rabbit hole to navigate your way through. And that's kind of it, yeah. Steve, commerce old bean. It is. It's all commerce, yeah. Mel, what is the book called? It's the Black's Law Dictionary 4th edition. And I've got the green one. The 4th edition is good because it has all the case law and precedents in it as well. So that's why I've got that one. I also have the 1st edition and a later edition as well, but that's the one I really use. And it is what it is. And if you brought that in front of a court, right, and you had an actual legitimate court, you couldn't lose, because there's no way that they can rebut it, because it is what it is. It's the facts. It's the law. But when you have a system that is either incompetent because they don't know it and they've been educated that way, or they do know it and they're doing their best to hide it, which is corrupt. If you have a system with either of those, then you've got a problem. Especially when it's brought up in the court forum and it's ignored and pushed aside, and you are threatened with, contempt, or threatened with this and that if you continue to question that. You've got a real problem, because you don't have justice, you don't have law. If you can't bring up your defense based on the law, right, well, you don't have any law. All they're going on is, what happened? Did this happen or did it not? Yeah, it happened, but it's not unlawful. Here's the law. Yeah, I just showed you it's not unlawful. And then they charge you because it happened, right? Wow, that's not a lawful system. That's not a justice system. That's a quasi-police court. That's what it is. It's a police court by definition. But anyway, yeah, it's really, really, really interesting. Lisa says, sometimes it is how we are receiving the information. It is how we're receiving the information. And that brings me to, when you're being accosted on the side of the road, or wherever you are at your home or whatever, by people in, public offices, then their job is to coerce you, right, and to ask you to contract. What they're doing is they're just asking you to contract. I saw a video the other day of a guy, the cops came around to give him a fine for, because he went to one of those protection rallies. And the cop read him his Miranda rights, and he said, anything you say or do can and will be used against you in a court of law. Do you understand? And he said, yes. Right? So what he's just done is agreed that anything that they talk about can now be used against him in a court of law. He's just said, yep, no worries. Not a problem. Well, you don't want to do that. Why do you want to contract with them? Sir, are you trying to contract with me? Are you acting as a constable right now under your common law oath? Because I'd like you to act under your common law oath, please. Right? And if he then presents himself to be a constable and a police officer, and he says, yes, I'm a police officer, I am acting under my common law duty, and then he continues to enforce or bring a summary charge, because a summary charge in principle is brought in the name of the private citizen, well, then he's committing fraud, right? And everything after that is null and void. At law, of course. But when we don't have a lawful judicial system, well, then we're kind of in trouble, right? Because we're under military rule, whatever. And just what they say goes, really. There's no point going in there. I don't know. So I guess it's really important that the people understand that we need a lawful judicial system that actually upholds the law, right? And when these things are presented to the courts, they're actually listened to. And I've gone into courtrooms where, it's supposed to be the prosecutor prosecuting, right? It's supposed to be the prosecutor saying, oh, well, you did this and you did that. And I say, yep, but this is the law, so therefore you're wrong, right? It should be that clear cut. But it ends up being me and the magistrate talking about the law and talking about this and that. And they end up just basically threatening and berating and, saying, well, you'll be held in contempt or, whatever. And that's sort of it. They kind of bully you. They use their public officers to intimidate and bully the people, right? That's how they operate the whole system. And that comes back to receiving the information, right? So, yeah, interesting stuff. Really interesting stuff. And super cool to understand and to learn and research. Yum. Rooibos tea. Caddy says, yes, it is all the language, the words, their meanings are important. Yeah, they're all important. Steve J. Sleep says, who is you? Yeah, I've heard that argument. Oh, let's have a look at who is you. Who is you? Oh, let's see. RSTU. That's why. Right, well, there's nothing in the Black's Law Dictionary of you. So I suppose we have a look at Oxford. Yeah. Well, I've seen that argument where people talk about you and who is you and whatever. I think it's the name, really, that you want to be aware of. Because when they ask you for a name, when you give them your name, right, your name is a designation. Remember that? Your name is a designation. When you give them your name, yeah, you're transferring ownership of your name to them. And then they can do whatever they want with it. That's why they're always, give me your name, give me your name. If you don't give me your name, we're going to lock you up, we're going to do this. So they threaten and they coerce you, even though they don't have a legal right to do it. They don't have a lawful right to do it. There's plenty of court cases that say they're not allowed to do that, But they do it because they're trying to gain your consent through coercion and duress, right? You, used with reference to the person or persons addressed, or one such person and one or more associated persons. Associated persons. Yeah, so persons, corporations, companies. It could also mean just being referenced to the human being by that definition. So, yeah, I don't know too much about the whole you argument. I've heard it argued and it seems to be quite confusing. It confuses me. I try to keep it nice and simple, right? I am known as this person. I'm known as Lucas. I'm not him. I'm not that, I can't swear on the Bible that that's me because I can't remember. Yeah, that would be hearsay. Everyone else has told me that that's who I am. But I wasn't there when I was given that name. I can't remember. It's hearsay. So who are you? Right? People call me Lucas. Yeah, but who are you? Well, people call me Lucas. I don't know. You know, I wasn't there when I was born. I didn't give myself that name. I didn't give myself that contract. It's all hearsay. I can't swear to that because I wasn't there to remember it. You know what I mean? It's hearsay. I'd be incriminating myself just by swearing that that's my name. Yeah. In certain circumstances. Anyway, I guess that'll do for now. That was kind of fun, right? Fun with words. Please share it, and thanks for watching. And maybe more fun with words to come. Get your pens and dictionaries and get ready to have a bit of fun and learning time. Because that's how I learn best, is by sharing, you know, and going through it. So thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your night.